Scotland is a place of history and mystery. It's a magical place of kings and clans, of cairns and castles, a haven for tourists delving into connections with the past. But of all the historical sites in Scotland, which do you think is the most important? If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and click the notification bell to find out when I upload new videos. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. If you want to know the most important historical site in Scotland, then I say this is it. What makes this place so significant? Its connection to our most famous king, our most celebrated queen, our most transformational monarch. There are more kings and queens of Scots buried here than any other place in Scotland. It was one of the country's richest religious sites, a place of pilgrimage, the resting place of saint and nobility, guardians of Scotland, as well as some more ordinary folk. It's the birthplace of kings, the shrine of saints, and a scene of transformation. Dunfermline Abbey was at the heart of Scotland's birth, and it's still part of the life of the community today. Today's Abbey was built by Scotland's most transformational monarch, but his story goes back further still. Let's go inside. I saw Dunfermline once described as Scotland's oldest abbey. I immediately thought, hold on, surely Iona? Although to be fair, Iona was established before the birth of Scotland. It was a time of Picts and Scots, Angles and Britons. This place was first built as those four peoples were coming together. In 1070, the Britons of Strathclyde in the west and the Angles in Northumbria in the east were in the process of being subsumed into Scotland. The national geography was taking form, but another bonding was taking place between Malcolm III of Scotland and the Saxon Margaret Atheling. And it happened right here. Not in the building as it stands today, but here, in this royal centre where Margaret subsequently built a church and invited Benedictine monks to establish a religious centre. Underneath the floor of the current abbey, you can still see the remains of the original church. You might metaphorically say the foundations on which Scotland was built. Margaret was buried further up the church at the top of the nave. This was in the original abbey, at the place where the ordinary folks were separated from the clergy at the point of that screen separating nave from choir. Her husband, Malcolm III's remains were also later buried here, and it's said that when she was reinterred, miraculously, her remains wouldn't move without his being brought with her. Oh. Their sons, King Edgar and Alexander III, followed them to Dunfermline here for burial. A couple of hundred years and a basket of posthumous miracles later, Margaret was made a saint in 1249, and that just added to the mystique of this place. But before then, our youngest son, David, would rebuild this abbey, still the best preserved 12th century Romanesque building in the country. You can see typical archways, carved columns, architectural features that link this place to Durham Cathedral, which was also part of David's lands and realm. He built this as he was rebuilding Scotland. As he was shaping with Norman architecture here, he was also Normanising out there, planting offshoots of this abbey in Murray as he brought the north under his control. Resources brought into this abbey from other parishes, including as far as St John's Kirk in my own hometown of Perth. The nature of agriculture was changing, population was expanding, and monasteries were very much part of that. Royal boroughs were being established, and David's feudal Scotland was growing. And at the heart of that melting pot of transition was David's rebuilding of this abbey and establishment of an extensive and most impressive monastery. It would have covered the whole of this site, cloisters, refectory, most of which is now gone today. David, the transformer, was also buried here with his parents and brothers. His grandson, Malcolm IV, rests here. The last of those Canmore kings of the House of Dunkeld was also buried here. He was Alexander III, who died 10 miles to the west when he fell from his horse on a stormy night. He died without an adult heir. Now, I don't need to tell you that it was his death without heirs that sparked the ambitions of England's Edward Longshanks to rule over the Scots. It was when Scots agreed the old alliance with Philip IV of France that Edward invaded. Now, if you needed a reason for why this is our most important historical site, then look no further than the fact that the old alliance was signed here at Dunfermline. Edward of England also came here during that occupation, but you might be surprised to know they actually made donations to the abbey. Now, if that seems strange, then remember that his sister had been married to Alexander III, and she's also buried here at Dunfermline. Now, we all know that the war with Edward was won by Robert the Bruce, with a victory at Bannockburn in the summer of 1314 being a decisive part of it. After Bannockburn, a parliament met at Cambuskenneth Abbey in November 1314 to issue a charter that disinherited all those that refused to come over to Bruce's patriotic cause. 2 weeks later, Robert Bruce was at Dunfermline Abbey declaring his intention to be buried here. It was almost as if, having settled the destiny of Scotland, he was setting his own destiny in this place. Now, you could argue that the charter signed at Cambuskenneth was what sparked the Second War of Independence, and some of the early heroes of that struggle are also buried here. Thomas Randolph, the Guardian, who followed Bruce during the minority of his son David II, was buried over here. Now, they weren't buried in this modern Abbey church. In fact, this has replaced the Lady Chapel destroyed at the times of the Reformation. When we came from the old Abbey nave to the modern Abbey church, we were passing from pre to post-Reformation Scotland. That's a marker of our history built into the very structure of this building. Reformation mobs destroyed a lot of the contents of the Abbey, although in 1580 there was a complaint that there are still Benedictines of Dunfermline with doors bolted and barred, keeping watch in their choir by shrines of St. Margaret and St. David and the sepulchres of Bruce and Randolph. The shrine to Queen, now St. Margaret here, was a hugely important pre-Reformation religious centre. Well after the Reformation though, Margaret was still revered as someone that conferred blessings on pregnant queens and noblewomen. That's why you get royal births here in the royal residences. James VI's wife, Queen Anne, transformed the dilapidated residential buildings next to the Abbey into a royal palace. Not only that, but seeking out St. Margaret's blessing, she gave birth to royal children here, including the last British monarch to be born in Scotland, Charles I. The fact that the buildings fell into decline again when the Stuarts headed south to become king and queen in England, that's also part of Scotland's story. By the time the troops of Charles's nemesis, Oliver Cromwell, occupied Scotland, the Eastern Choir had collapsed, and Cromwell's soldiers plundered the ruins for stonework and used the site as a ready-made quarry. No doubt, with the help of some of the locals. So by the late Georgian period, you would have had nave, church, and ruins. But they decided to build a new abbey church that you see here today. You can see the dramatic change from medieval to modern. By the time they built this new abbey church in 1818, this place had lived every stage of the life of Scotland. And as the ground was being cleared and excavated for this new church, they discovered a sarcophagus containing a skeleton with a sternum split open, almost as if to cut out a heart to send it on crusade with good Sir James Douglas. But there's also a connection to emigration and diaspora. Right next to this site is the Carnegie Birthplace Museum. But this isn't the only place commemorating the Scottish businessman and philanthropist. There's also Carnegie Hall here, where I'll be on this stage on the 4th of November 2023, performing my show, Stories of Scotland, to you out there. So if you're from Fife, why not come and see me? Click the link top right now for tickets, or for all tour shows and information, click the link in the description below. I'll see you here. For many of the people who come to Dunfermline Abbey and Palace today, it's a modern day pilgrimage to see the resting place of Robert the Bruce. Now, the reason I made this video was to make the point that yes, that is a reason to visit Dunfermline Abbey, but there's so much more here that ties this place to the history of our nation. I can't think of any site that contains so much of Scotland's history in one place. Let me know Scotland's most important place to you in the comment section. If you'd like to know my favourite castle in Scotland, then watch the video coming up on screen now. You can support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member, or you can buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, ha mi an dóchas gon bí lá málaigh. Cheery and drasta.